Welcome to the Institute for Global Engagement's Faith and International Affairs conference call series. My name is Dennis Hoover, Vice President for Research and Publications at IGE, and I'll serve as the moderator on today's call. Our topic today is the Obama administration's record on international religious freedom policy. The Obama administration has come in for some criticism on this score, especially, but not exclusively, from the political right. On the one hand, some of President Obama's notable speeches have included rhetorical support for religious freedom, a recent example being the president's remarks on religious freedom during a speech in India last month. But on the other hand, critics have questioned the extent to which rhetoric has been backed up with tangible policy actions and capacity-building measures within the U.S. government. Joining us today to help sort through these questions and to argue that the administration's record is not as bad as is often portrayed in the popular and religious media is Judd Birdsall. Judd is a longtime friend and colleague at the Institute for Global Engagement. Currently, he serves as an editorial fellow on IGE's journal, The Review of Faith and International Affairs, and as co-leader with Jane Lindsay of a series of transatlantic dialogues on religion and foreign policy funded by the British Council and co-sponsored by IGE, the Center on Religion and Public Life at University of Leeds, and the Berkeley Center at Georgetown University. Judd is also currently completing a PhD at Cambridge University focused on religion and foreign policy. Prior to Cambridge, he served at the U.S. State Department in the Office of International Religious Freedom and on the Secretary of State's policy planning staff. Now, before we get started, just a few words on today's call format. We'll begin with 20 minutes of remarks from Judd, and then we'll open the floor for your questions. If you'd like to ask Judd a question, please press 5* at any point during the call, and you'll be placed in the queue. Please also note that this call is on the record, and audio recording will be made available on the IGE website. So with that introduction, let's turn now to our call. Thanks again, Judd, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Dennis, and thanks to the whole team at IGE that makes these conference calls possible. And thanks to all of you for being on this call today. Many of you are directly involved in religious freedom work, and you actually know this topic much better than I do. So I look forward to our time of Q&A in just a few minutes. I hope that you all can hear me okay. I'm in from Skype from my small village in rural England. We just have 400 people in this village, and we don't yet have high-speed internet access. But if the sound quality is not good, I'm sure the IGE folks will let me know. But now on to our topic. Obama's international religious freedom record, not as bad as you think. To say that his religious freedom record is not as bad as you think doesn't sound like much of a compliment. If my wife asked me how dinner tasted, and I told her, honey, your cooking is not as bad as you think, she probably wouldn't take it as much of a compliment. She'd actually be quite offended, and rightfully so. But in the case of Obama's religious freedom record, it actually is a compliment, even a provocative compliment, given the context. And that context, as many of you are aware, is the widespread perception that Obama doesn't care about religious freedom, that he's weak and ineffectual on the issue, that he tiptoes around issues of Islamic extremism, that his domestic policies are actually undermining religious freedom at home, and that his administration has given short shrift to the plight of persecuted religious minorities around the world. And so what I want to do in our time together today is look at some of the main reasons why Obama's record is perceived, and then give some reasons why I think it's not as bad as you think. So a fairly basic two-part outline. First, why it's bad. Unfortunately for the Obama administration, many of its missteps on religious freedom have been quite tangible and high profile, while its successes have been usually lower profile and harder to quantify and to appreciate. And to my mind, the most tangible and high profile misstep has been the fact that the position of Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom has been vacant for 4 of Obama's 6 years in office, or 2/3 of his presidency. And for the 2 years that it was filled, it was really functionally vacant. It took the administration well over a year even to nominate its first religious freedom ambassador, So right away, the perception set in that Obama didn't care about the issue. And then when his administration nominated a motivational speaker with no religious freedom experience to the post of the ambassadorship, it just further cemented that negative perception. Now, as someone who served in the Freedom Office at the State Department during this time, I would remind people that even in the absence of an ambassador, the work of promoting religious freedom is still carried out by the Religious Freedom Office, by the U.S. Commission on Religious Freedom, and by scores of American diplomats stationed all over the world. And many senior officials also carried religious freedom during the absence. I would particularly highlight the work of Rashad Hussain, who is the U.S. Special Envoy to the organization operation. He really was the de facto religious freedom ambassador throughout 2010 and 2011. But the fact remains that without an ambassador, the U.S. religious freedom diplomacy loses face because the ambassador is the face of that diplomacy. Now, I try to be diplomatic in my critique of Obama's first religious freedom ambassador, Susan Johnson Cook, but it's no secret that she was regarded as a disappointment. She never demonstrated much knowledge of or passion for religious freedom issues. If you watched her press conferences during the rollout of the annual Religious Freedom Report at the State Department, she was painfully out of her depth on the most basic elements of international affairs, U.S. foreign policy, and religious freedom. Then after she resigned, there was another long gap, 9 months, before the administration even nominated the current ambassador. Things can take a long time within the bureaucracy, but these gaps have done considerable damage to the administration's reputation. So a narrative developed. Obama doesn't care about religious freedom. And any missteps on the issue were interpreted in light of and just added to that narrative. And when Obama and other senior officials did showcase their commitment to the issue, as Dennis alluded to, critics have easily dismissed those contributions as just mere rhetoric in the absence of an ambassador at large. And certainly it didn't help that the first 2.5-year absence of an ambassador at large overlapped with the Arab Spring and the spike in religious hostilities throughout the Middle East. And then the second 1.5-year absence of an ambassador coincided with the rise of ISIS and their horrific persecution of minorities in Iraq and Syria, as well as Boko Haram's persecutions in Nigeria. So just as religious persecution was getting a lot of attention, that brought more attention to the fact that the administration did not have a religious freedom ambassador. There are several other reasons why the record of the Obama administration on religious freedom is perceived as bad. Let me just briefly mention a couple more. First, CPCs, designations of countries of particular concern for religious freedom violations, as called for by the Religious Freedom Act of 1998. Before the Obama administration, the practice had been to issue CPC designations basically annually, but it took the Obama administration 2.5 years to issue its first designations. Again, furthering the impression that it didn't care about religious freedom. Also, as Dennis alluded to, critics on the right, a number of critics have conflated Obama's domestic and international religious freedom records. The fears over the HHS contraceptive mandate have spilled over into criticisms of his international record. So if, in Mitt Romney's words, Obama was waging a, quote, war on religion at home, then we could presume he wasn't doing much to advance religious freedom abroad. And a unifying thread for these critics between the domestic and the foreign was Obama's use of the phrase freedom of worship a few times during 2010 and 2011. To critics, this phrase showed the administration's true colors. They wanted to truncate freedom of religion into just freedom of worship, privatizing faith, confining faith inside the four walls of the church. Now, to me, that this whole controversy was without merit, and I'll say so for 3 reasons. First, Obama has spoken at great length about his personal commitment to faith-based social justice activism. His heroes are people like Martin Luther King, who hardly kept his faith private. And Obama's whole conversion to Christianity is very much framed around his understanding of Christianity as a source for social good. Second, the word worship has been used throughout American history as both a subset of and synonym for religion in general, so that when Americans hear freedom of worship, they know it can just be a synonym for freedom of religion. And third, George W. Bush used the term worship in just this way scores of times during his presidency, and I don't remember anyone criticizing him for it. So that clearly there was a partisan element, or has been a partisan element, to the criticisms of Obama's religious freedom record. Now I want to transition to the good, or at least the not as bad as you think portion. Let me offer a few reasons why I think Obama's international religious freedom record is not as bad as you think. First, though, just a bit of perspective on how I think we ought to evaluate a president's record on religious freedom. I think we need to be realistic about what we can expect a president and his administration to actually do and to actually accomplish on international religious freedom. Historically, U.S. presidents only gave very occasional attention to religious persecution overseas. It would be hard to quantify, but I think a case could probably be made that Obama has engaged on international religious freedom issues more than any other president in U.S. history. Certainly he's done so as much as any other president. And if we look at the broader area of religious engagement and religion and foreign policy, the progress during this administration is absolutely unprecedented. But all of that engagement doesn't guarantee any dramatic progress on religious freedom overseas. The United States is a superpower, but it's not omnipotent, and we can't force countries to do what they don't want to do, especially on an issue that's as sensitive and complicated and volatile as the relationship between religion and state. Close collusion between the sacred and the temporal has been a normal pattern of human civilization for basically ever, for millennia, and Obama's been in office for 6 years. So it would be unfair to expect Obama to demonstrate any sort of massive revolution on religious freedom. Perhaps some modest evolution towards religious freedom should be expected, but certainly not revolution. So with those caveats in mind, let's look at a couple of the positive aspects of the Obama administration's record on international religious freedom. I want to look at the administration's contribution in 3 areas: rhetorically, bureaucratically, and diplomatically. First, rhetorically. Religious freedom is one of those issues that naturally lends itself to lofty presidential rhetoric. It's about the Founding Fathers, the First Amendment, American values, ultimate meaning, the search for truth, overcoming oppression, some very powerful, resonant themes. And Obama's rhetoric on religious freedom has been, I would argue, as good as any of his predecessors. But Obama and his administration have also made some distinctive rhetorical contributions. Whereas previous presidents have talked about religious freedom mainly in terms of the principle of human rights and of American values, Obama has framed the issue in much more of a pragmatic and strategic way. He's talked about the interconnections between religious freedom and development, social stability, national security. He's framed religious freedom not just as an abstract principle, but as a social good that empowers faith-based service, that fosters intercommunal harmony. And this sort of rhetoric recasts religious freedom as something that's much less threatening and much more positive. And it also tracks well with the recent scholarship on the social implications of religious freedom and the lack thereof, much of which has been ably published in our review of faith and international affairs. Second, bureaucratically. There were some concerns early on in the administration about the possible demotion of the Religious Freedom Office and the ambassador and the issue of religious freedom. And that had mostly to do with some quirky bureaucratic dynamics within the Human Rights Bureau during the absence of an ambassador, or the absence of a qualified ambassador. But overall, I think the reality has been that the Religious Freedom Office and the issue that it serves has become much more mainstreamed at the State Department, though Johnson Cook's tenure did set things back a bit. The Religious Freedom Office has been instrumental in broadening the general religion space at the department. It was at the forefront of establishing the Religion and Global Affairs Forum back in 2009, which helped to give rise to the Religion and Foreign Policy Working Group that gave rise to the Office of Faith-Based Community Initiatives, which I've just heard is now called the Office of Religion and Global Affairs. I think a much better name for the State Department. So something quite dramatic has actually happened during the Obama administration. A department that has been called in the past a bastion of secular fundamentalism, afflicted with religion avoidance disorder, has of its own initiative, without congressional pressure, created a faith-based office, or Religion and Global Affairs Office. Religious engagement is now a much more mainstreamed diplomatic priority. So the challenge now for the Religious Freedom Office is to leverage that momentum around religious engagement and work effectively with the all the different religion-related players at the State Department. And I highlight that because previously a major barrier to effective religious freedom policy was a State Department culture that was uneasy with religion. So if you have diplomats who are uneasy with religion, they're not going to be excited about promoting freedom of religion. But that culture has moved in a much more religion-friendly direction, creating a more hospitable climate for the Religious Freedom Office and its mandate. And I think that has much to do with the first point about rhetoric. It has to do with how Obama and other officials have talked about religious freedom in strategic and more positive ways. Third, diplomatically, Obama has thoughtfully raised religious freedom throughout his presidency. He highlighted religious freedom in his speech to the Turkish parliament on his very first presidential trip. And as Dennis mentioned, he highlighted the issue again in India when he was there in January and helped to spark a very healthy debate in that country about how they navigate religious pluralism. He's discussed it with the Chinese and the Burmese and any number of other leaders. And of course, U.S. officials are engaging on the issues every day in countries around the world and in multilateral settings. Now, the obvious question is, has any of this actually advanced religious freedom? Has this diplomacy borne any fruit? It's hard to answer that because so much of the activity is not public, and it's also we can't prove a negative. We can't discern how much worse things might be if the U.S. didn't engage on religious freedom issues. But there have been some concrete public improvements in some countries. We can't attribute those developments solely to the Obama administration, but clearly the Obama administration played some role in encouraging the progress. Let me just highlight a couple of things. Nothing dramatic, but some things that are positive nonetheless. In 2011, the Obama administration achieved a major diplomatic breakthrough when it successfully rallied international support for a UN resolution that effectively replaced the old defamation of religion resolution. The defamation resolution was basically an international blasphemy law. Now that approach, thankfully, has been replaced with this resolution that calls on states to take proactive steps to foster tolerance and respect instead of simply banning speech that certain religious groups find offensive. A couple other examples. In Armenia, a couple of years ago, the parliament there passed a law allowing for alternative service to military duty for conscientious objectors. And they also released all of the Jehovah's Witnesses who were in prison as conscientious objectors. In Tunisia last year, one of the few bright spots in the Arab Spring, that country adopted a new constitution that is not unproblematic on religion, but it does take some steps forward in enshrining freedom of religion and belief. The Obama folks have also been active in advocating on behalf of scores of prisoners of conscience around the world, some really high profile like Kenneth Bey and Pastor Saeed in Iran, and some that are not in the newspapers. And in some cases, prisoners have been released. In other cases, perhaps they've been granted shorter sentences or better treatment. But of course, the long-term goal of religious freedom policy is not to get people out of jail. It's about fostering the social and legal environment in which no one is imprisoned or harassed or discriminated against on account of their faith. And I would argue that despite the many missteps that I mentioned earlier, the Obama administration has done a reasonably good job of laying the rhetorical, bureaucratic, and diplomatic foundations for an effective long-term strategy. And now the administration finally has the right man for the ambassador position to carry that mission forward. And I'll end on this. Rabbi David Saperstein has been a leader in the religious freedom community for decades and is universally respected. If you attended Saperstein's swearing-in ceremony last week, or at least read the transcript online as I did, you saw that Secretary Kerry was very effusive in his praise for Saperstein, saying that he was made for the ambassador position and that the position was made for him. And I think that's right. He's the right man for the job at this time. So the Obama administration's record on international religious freedom is not as bad as you think, but neither is it as good as I would like it to be. However, now I think we can be a bit more optimistic that the best days for this administration's religious freedom advocacy are still ahead of us. Thank you, and I'll hand it over to Dennis.
Thank you, Judd. Or as they say in Cambridge, many thanks. You've given us much to chew on, and I'm sure our callers are eager to engage with you further on these issues. So we'll now open the lines for questions from the audience. As a reminder to audience members, if you'd like to ask a question, press 5 star. And when it's your turn to ask your question, today's call administrator, Lindsay Kuntz, will announce your name and unmute your line so that you may ask it. Lines will be placed back on mute immediately following the asking of a question. Also, please note that if you are in the queue already and for any reason decide you no longer wish to ask your question, you can simply press 5 star again and your name will be erased from the queue. And finally, for the sake of all our callers, I'll ask that when you are called upon, please immediately ask your question rather than providing any lengthy commentary. So with that, Lindsay, our first question, please.
Sure. Our first question today comes from Ms. Courtney Brode. Courtney, go ahead and ask your question, please.
Thank you, Judd, for your very informative discussion on the Obama administration. And my question is, what would the Obama administration need to do in the next 2 years to go from a record that is not as bad as you think to actually having a good record on international religious freedom?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, that's certainly the goal, to move from not as bad as you think to actually being good, or even better. I think they need to show some tangible progress somewhere in the world. The Bush administration certainly didn't have a lot to show for its 8 years of religious freedom advocacy, but it had one very clear example of where they made a concrete difference, and that was in Vietnam, where they placed that country on the CPC list from 2004 to 2006 and took it off of the list because of all the progress Vietnam had made in terms of banning forced renunciations of faith, allowing religious groups to register, reopening lots of churches that have been closed, and so on. We haven't seen that sort of progress really in any country during the Obama administration. So I think the Religious Freedom Office and those who support it would be smart to find a country or a particular opportunity. Perhaps not one of the countries of particular concern, but a country of particular opportunity where they can invest a lot of resources and encourage progress. I think also they need to review the CPC list, and it would go a long way if they added another country that merits designation. And certainly there are a number of contenders that merit inclusion on that list. And if they were able to muster what they would need to do bureaucratically to get another country on the list, that would actually go a long way in showing that the administration is serious about advancing this priority diplomatically. Happy to take the next question.
Hi, this is Jim Walker from IG, and thank you, Jeff, for your very informative session. And I have a question regarding the new ambassador at large. So as we know, he was just sworn in about 6 days ago, and so I was just wondering what's your view on him and what's your expectation of him given his background in the religious freedom sector. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very, very positive on Ambassador Saperstein. He fills me with a lot of renewed hope for the office and for the issue. I was just recently at a transatlantic conference on religious freedom that brought together Europeans and North Americans who work on this issue. And really for the first time during the Obama administration, there's a sense of optimism about the office and a sense of confidence in the office now that Saperstein is there. And he's somebody who knows the issues, who has broad contacts and networks, and he's not afraid to do battle on behalf of the issue of religious freedom and on behalf of persecuted people. So I think he'll be able to navigate the bureaucracy well and advance the issue as best he can. And it goes a long way that both the President and the Secretary of State have highlighted him publicly in recent days, which just further strengthens his hand, given that his colleagues know that he has the confidence of the President and the Secretary.
Thank you, Judd. Our next question comes from Chaplain Colonel Kaiser. Go ahead, please.
I think one of the things that the United States could do to show its commitment to religious freedom would be to look at some of our own policies. And it seems to me that the Department of Defense religious policy on conscientious objection, which only supports those who are pacifists and does not allow for any of those who, for other reasons or for just war reasons, would object to war. And so since Vietnam, anyone who's objected to our conflicts or participating in them had to go to jail or go to Canada because we no longer have alternate service.
Well, thank you for that comment. I would be out of my league there in offering a comment on that, but just to say that a critical element of our international advocacy for this issue is our domestic example. And I think Americans need to reckon with the fact that our history on this issue is complicated, and even our present practice with the issue is quite complicated. If you look at the data that Brian Grimm has put out on social hostilities and government restrictions on religious freedom, America is actually not at the top of the list. Countries like Brazil, Taiwan, Japan actually score much better than the United States, particularly because of some social hostilities we have around religion. So that's certainly something we need to be mindful of always, that we need to practice what we preach. Thank you.
All right. Our next question comes from a caller who don't actually have a name affiliated with the number. So if you are calling from 805-497-2114, I've gone ahead and unmuted your line, and you can ask your question.
Hi, this is Rob, and I'm calling from Southern California, just back from Iraq, second time there on a mission of relief mission. And even though I appreciate everything you've said about increased rhetoric, well, that's basically, as we know, due to increased hostility. One must respond. But rhetoric versus results seem to be way out of line for the people in the Middle East. What we're finding now is, why do you believe that both Jordan and Egypt are more confrontational with Orthodox Islam than our current president, fails to identify the tenets of the church, the tenets of the faith, and therefore the people in Iraq and Syria, minority religions, are suffering, and they've said to me multiple times, why doesn't the president speak out against the hostility and call it what it is? We have to name it. So why do you believe that the president has failed to name the enemy, radical Islam or Orthodox religion, as they have done on the news in Jordan, as they've done in the news in Egypt? I never thought our news media would be behind those two. So please try to identify that, because that's a real issue for many, many people right now. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm certainly not a Middle East expert, so I can't offer a terribly thoughtful answer. But I would say this, that I'm sympathetic to what the president and the administration has tried to do in terms of its rhetoric on violent religious extremism. And actually, a very thoughtful article on this recently was published by Dennis Hoover on this call. So I would commend that piece to you. I can't quite summarize his argument, but I would just add that that the president has not wanted to further inflame religious tensions by highlighting the religious element here, and he doesn't want to give jihadists the sort of religious label that they actually crave. They want to be known as holy warriors and jihadists and Islamic fighters, and he doesn't want to grant them that. Now, of course, the trouble with that is, does your rhetoric shape how you actually think about these issues? Where if you're not saying religion, are you actually not thinking religion? Are you not taking religion and theological beliefs and religious institutions and so on into account as you think about your strategy for counteracting violent religious extremism? I think that's the tension, that's the balance that this administration has tried to reckon with. So I'm actually sympathetic to what Obama has tried to do, but in terms of how it actually plays overseas in the Middle East, that's always going to be difficult, and that's outside my area of expertise. But thank you for your comment there.
Thank you, Judd. We actually had a caller who had to leave early, but they emailed in a question. So they've asked you talked about the Obama administration's progress on religious engagement. How do you think that relates to promoting religious freedom? Could religious engagement come at the expense of religious freedom?
It can. I mean, there are different ways to conceptualize the relationship between religious engagement and religious freedom. And it reminds me of the bureaucratic politics adage that where you stand depends on where you sit. How you view that issue depends on sort of what your job is. If you're a religious freedom activist, you tend to view religious freedom as the goal, and perhaps religious engagement is just one way of pursuing that. If you're involved in more sort of interfaithy kind of things, or questions of religion and development, or whatever it might be, you tend to see religious freedom as one aspect of religious engagement. So multiple ways to view it. Religious engagement could be the broad umbrella category, and religious freedom is one dimension, or religious freedom is the broad category, and religious engagement is one way to pursue it. I tend to view them as overlapping spheres that can be mutually reinforcing. They can actually work at cross purposes. But they actually can be mutually reinforcing too. A lot of it depends actually just on the personalities of the people involved and the bureaucratic arrangements involved. And so now that the State Department has both a religious freedom office with its ambassador and a religion and global affairs office with its senior advisor, it's critical for them to work synergistically and enhance each other's work where possible, such that there's a recognition that religious freedom is a necessary prerequisite for any meaningful religious engagement activity. You can't do a lot of religious engagement in North Korea, for example, but you can in religiously free countries or moderately religiously free countries. And if done well, religious engagement can build trust and relationships and respect between religious groups and between religions and their government, such that there becomes more space for tolerance and pluralism and freedom. So best case scenario, they become mutually reinforcing, but a lot of depends on the politics and the bureaucratics and actually just the personnel involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is going to come from Mr. Galen Carey. So Galen, go ahead, please.
Hi, it's Galen Carey at the NAE. Last year, the Congress approved a position called the Special Envoy for Religious Minorities in the Middle East, but State Department has so far refused to name anyone to that position, and we've heard off the record that they're thinking of double-hatting Saperstein. So I wanted to know what your thoughts are about that. Is that what impact would that have if the ambassador was given a second full-time job, and would you think that it would be better to have an actual special envoy?
Yeah, good to hear from you, Galen. My own view on that, now that I'm outside of government and can kind of speak my mind, is that I never saw the need for a special envoy to religious communities in the Middle East. I always thought that was duplicative of the Religious Freedom Ambassador and would just create all sorts of unnecessary bureaucratic tension and diplomatic confusion overseas as to who would speak on any given issue. It's already bad enough that Congress had to impose the Religious Freedom Office on the State Department to begin with 15 years ago. And that's been a difficult road for the State Department for 15 years. Now to have another congressional imposition on the State Department would just, I think, exacerbate that problem. A much more constructive approach, I think, was the backstory behind the creation of the faith-based office, where it came from an internal recognition that they needed more expertise and resources on this issue, so that there's a sense of ownership and excitement for the Religion and Global Affairs Office that there certainly would not be for a special envoy to Middle Eastern minorities office. So I'm not privy to exactly what the administration is doing on that. I do think they're going to have some sort of an answer to that congressional pressure, but I think it's going to be an answer that makes sense bureaucratically and diplomatically. So thanks for your question.
Okay, our next one. So you've talked a lot about Obama's commitment to religious freedom. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about John Kerry's commitment to the issue?
Sure. Yeah. What to say? I mean, Kerry certainly has said all the right things. In his Senate confirmation hearing, he touched on it. Of course, at the rollout of the Religious Freedom Report, he's touched on it. At the swearing in for Saperstein, he's mentioned it. Probably mentioned it several other times that I'm not aware of. What's always interesting is when you have remarks that are basically required, like the rollout of the Religious Freedom Report. It's always interesting to see what sort of personal bits the Secretary of State will add. What sort of added emphasis will they bring? For Clinton, there clearly was a recognition of the importance of religious freedom as a human rights issue. I think that's how she came at it. For Kerry, it seems that the way he comes at it is from much more of a interfaith relations or religious engagement approach. He seems to get that and see religious freedom as one dimension of religious engagement and intercommunal harmony. And so when he talks about the issue, he talks about tensions between religious groups in colonial America and so on, and the lessons we've learned as Americans and how to deal with our own pluralism. So I think that's where his passion is, and I think that's fine, and that's enough to go on in terms of leveraging secretary-level support for religious freedom.
All right. Well, thank you, Judd. I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor back over to Dr. Hoover.
Thanks, Lindsay, and thank you, Judd, for very insightful comments on all these things, and thanks also for the shout out to my recent op-ed on these questions, and I have a question for you as well that relates to that same theme of the particular challenges that come with promoting religious freedom in Muslim-majority countries. And one of President Obama's early speeches in Cairo was one that got a lot of attention because it did speak in pretty frank terms about religious freedom. And so I was wondering about your reflections on what has happened in sort of the post-Cairo era. There's been various criticisms of the administration for dropping the ball, essentially, in terms of its post-Cairo activity. So what happened to religious freedom in the Cairo follow-up?
Yeah, good question. There were certainly some critics who really pounced on that. Tom Farr wrote an article where he talked about how every issue that Obama mentioned in the Cairo speech then had a follow-up working group in the U.S. government, except for religious freedom. And I think it's understandable why that happened. Initially, there was a working group. I believe it was called something like Entrepreneurship and Interfaith Relations, or something like it. It was a bizarre combination of two things. But really, the administration didn't see a need for a particular working group on religious freedom because they handed off that issue to the White House faith-based office. They were the de facto working group for that issue, given that Obama had raised religious freedom in Cairo in a very interfaithy sort of way. As I mentioned, how he frames the issue around faith-based service and intercommunal harmony, issues that were very much at the fore of the White House faith-based office during his first term. So it made sense to just hand that off to the White House faith-based office. Now, they could have, perhaps should have, created a separate working group on it, but there also wasn't an obvious person to lead that working group, given that there wasn't an ambassador at large. So that just further compounded the problem of the absence of an ambassador. But I think the post-Cairo work on religious freedom actually has been pretty good, given that it's provided this more positive framework in which to pursue religious freedom, not just as an abstract principle, but as something that's for the social good. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. I think we have one more question.
Yes, we just had a question come in. So, Rima, your line has been unmuted. Go ahead and ask the question. Go ahead, Rima. Okay, so Rima,
how effective do you think the new ambassador is going to be about requesting or pushing for more religious freedom in Myanmar, especially when it comes to the Muslim minorities there?
That's a great practical question. Short answer is I don't know. Burma or Myanmar was a country I used to cover at the State Department. I haven't followed it as closely as I would have liked the last couple of years, and I don't know the current status of U.S. government engagement on religious freedom in the country. But clearly it's a priority, and as you point out, the case is particularly egregious with the Rohingya Muslim community there that is repressed in all sorts of ways and doesn't have even Burmese citizenship. So I hope the ambassador makes that a priority of his, because a lot of things in Burma are moving in a positive direction, but that's one that clearly is not, and there clearly needs to be more pressure put on the Burmese government and on the Burmese Buddhist leadership to allow for greater freedom for Muslims in that country.
Well, thank you, Judd. I believe that is all of our questions. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise on this important topic, and it'll be very interesting to see how things play out over the next couple of years with a new ambassador at large in place and a new level of institutionalization with the State Department Office of Religion and Global Affairs. And thank you to all our callers for joining us today. I hope you will join us again on our next Faith and International Affairs conference call on Thursday, March 26th, when IG President Chris Feigl will be speaking on the Cradle Fund and the future of Iraq. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful day.